Coming up on this week's show, it's incredible.
We're at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to meet the people who helped to put man on the moon 50 years ago this weekend.
When the Eagle has landed, you can hear the sigh in the complete room. You can hear people take a breath.
We talked to the person who's determined to become one of the first ever space tourists.
Takeoff is going to be wonderful. They say, are we ready to launch? So we're still flying here, flying. And then get, yes, go, release. 3, 2, 1, go. And then, whoa.
And discover an out-of-this-world experience close to the Arctic Circle in Iceland.
Years ago, Apollo 11 set off carrying 3 astronauts towards the moon. 2 of them actually set foot on it. And our perception of the universe has never been the same since.
No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4.
It's the only thing that I can think of that was better than safe.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
The 50th anniversary is clearly a huge milestone for the Kennedy Space Center here on Merritt Island in Florida, and an opportunity to showcase what's going on with future space travel too. But first, I want to get a feel for what the atmosphere was like in the run-up to the monumental event in 1969.
I think one of the things that we had throughout the Apollo program that I don't see since, passion. Almost everyone were passionate about going to the moon, something that had never been done before.
The exhibits here are authentic space-ready vehicles that in the end didn't make the journey into orbit, including this command service module.
And this is the centerpiece, a magnificent Saturn V rocket, just like the one that went to the moon. Now upright, it's taller than the Statue of Liberty, with 7.5 million pounds of thrust. Now it's comprised of 3 stages, 2 of which were jettisoned before the astronauts returned to the Earth's atmosphere. It's incredible.
Between 1967 and 1974, 13 missions launched using a Saturn V rocket, including the 10 Apollo trips. This is one of only 3 of these rockets left in the world today.
I've got to say, all that wiring and cabling, it looks really exposed and raw, but I guess it worked.
This is a lunar module for Apollo 11. In charge of the engineering of the module was the aptly named Charlie Mars, and he says the atmosphere was electric.
We were in the Operations and Control Building at Kennedy. It's where we mated all the vehicles and did our test. And I can still remember this day hearing the count from Buzz Aldrin, hearing what was going on, so much fuel, moved so far, and the complete silence. When the Eagle has landed, you can hear the sigh in the complete room. You can hear people take a breath.
Tranquility Base here.
The Eagle has landed, or words that every schoolboy of the coming generation is probably going to have to learn and pass on to succeeding generations.
Now, believe it or not, I was actually around during the time of the first moon landing, as a small child, I have to say. But I do remember really vividly friends and family gathering around the TV set to witness what was for us a hugely important moment in human history. At the time, the space race was closely intertwined with the Cold War between the superpowers of the USSR and the USA. And the first country to land on the moon, well, that was a really big thing.
The whole moon program itself was all a part of politics. You know, what are we going to do to get away from this disaster in Cuba, and what are we going to do about all this integration activity, and what are we going to do about the war over there? Need something different for people to latch onto. Let's go to the moon.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. It really is.
We came from all over the world, literally, you know, into this environment, and we worked our tails off for many years to get to the moon in that decade. You know, it required a lot of personal sacrifice. So I had 16.
John Tribe says the astronauts knew they were going to be in the public eye, but didn't quite realise how much scrutiny they would be.
Neil Armstrong was kind of a quiet guy, but he was always a gentleman. He was always polite.
So that's you and Neil Armstrong.
Yep. When you've spent 50 years of your life in the public eye, Neil backed away. You know, he didn't want to sign anything. He didn't want photos taken. He wanted to just be private person Neil Armstrong.
At this museum in nearby Titusville, consoles and various space mission memorabilia donated by astronauts and space workers are lovingly showcased. This week is very much about honouring the achievements of the past, but at the Kennedy Space Center, one eye's firmly fixed on producing astronauts and technicians for the future, with hands-on training experiences for younger visitors. They'll be needed.
We're in a real renaissance now. The nation is building 3 capsules to return to the moon. 2 of them are being built here. We're building big rockets, state-of-the-art satellite facility. It's good time.
Because the birthplace of American spaceflight is now reinventing itself as America's spaceport.
Our long-term vision is to make Central Florida the gateway to all of the economic activity that's going to be occurring in the solar system over the next 50 to 100 years.
Now, the next space race is not between international superpowers, but between super corporations run by billionaires who want to be the leading light in the space economy. Now, behind me, SpaceX, one of those corporations, is actually building a starship which they intend to go to Mars. To be honest, I'm quite surprised we've got this close and we can actually see it, because corporations like this are normally very secretive about this kind of stuff, so wow.
And I was right to be wary. Turns out this is only a prototype that'll be used for testing. The real starship's being built elsewhere.
3, 2, 1, 0.
While SpaceX, owned by billionaire Elon Musk, in the meantime continue to launch rockets from Kennedy Space Center, like this, carrying satellites on behalf of the US Air Force, amongst others.
Command engine start. 2, 1.
And SpaceX aren't the only players in town. Blue Origin is owned by the richest man in the world, Amazon's Jeff Bezos.
We're fortunate here in Florida. Our goal is to try to make sure that we have these billionaires and others trying to outcompete one another for whose is bigger here in Florida.
And what about tourism to the moon?
We're probably not too far away from that. A decade or two. I think when people start making lots of money by providing tourism in space, then more people will want to do it, which further drives down the price.
But for those of us who can't afford the hundreds of thousands of pounds to go up into space, the goal of the Kennedy Space Center is to keep us entertained with interactive exhibits, events and celebrations during this, the year of Apollo.
Well, if you're keen to reach for the stars on your next Earthbound trip, here are some travel show suggestions for places you could head to.
You can step back in time and tour the Apollo Mission Control Center in Houston, where you can see for yourself where NASA employees held their breath on July the 20th, 1969, as Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the moon. The room recently had a $5 million restoration, complete with Apollo-era coffee cups and ashtrays to help take you back. This weekend, 4-day music festival Blue Dot will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing at Jodrell Bank Observatory in the UK. The venue was recently awarded UNESCO World Heritage status to recognise the key, yet lesser-known monitoring role it played in the Apollo 11 mission. If you've ever wondered how weightlessness feels, then Star City Space Center in Kazakhstan offers zero-gravity flights. The previously top-secret location is where cosmonauts have trained since the Great Space Race of the 1960s. And the International Dark Sky Association is on a mission to preserve the night and has created a program to reward those that are doing their bit to protect the darkness of our skies. Last month, the Grand Canyon became an international dark sky park by dimming over half of their 5,000 lights, meaning you've got a pretty good chance of spotting a shooting star there.
Well, stay with us on the Travel Show, because coming up,
we meet the man who's determined to become one of the world's first ever space tourists.
Suddenly you go from all this sort of noise and power and everything, it's silence, and you're floating around, you're looking at the beautiful Earth, you're weightless, so there's like nothing.
And discover the crucial but little known role that Iceland played in those moon landings 50 years ago.
well, right now I'm in the Playa Linda beach area, which is a favourite viewing spot for the hundreds of thousands of people who line this road to watch the current generation of rocket launches, often ferrying cargo to and from the International Space Station. Now, companies like SpaceX and Boeing do that under contract from NASA, and sometimes from the very same launch pad that the Apollo 11 mission took off from 50 years ago. Now, the exciting thing that everyone's waiting for is the first commercial manned trip into orbit, which one of those companies is vying to do, which would be really exciting. Now, if you want to find out the timings of these launches, you can do that by going to the KennedySpaceCenter.com website, but there are also live streaming websites where you can watch the launches wherever you are in the world. Now, as we've been finding out, space tourism is going to be big business. But what will it be like to be one of those first paying customers to go up into orbit? Well, we've met a man who's lined up to do just that thing.
My name is Pierre Wimmer. I'm a financier, philanthropist, adventurer, and soon-to-be astronaut. When I grew up, it wasn't really possible to even think about going into space. Traveled the Earth, I've experienced so many great things, but as a 21st century human being, space has got to be the new frontier. The Earth is more or less discovered, and wherever you show up, there's a soft drink dispenser or something. Somebody's been there before. Space is not so. There's been less than 600 people to space ever. It's amazing. We as humankind have traveled in a band of about 11 kilometers, 10K up in the air, more or less, and 1K down in the water where most submarines would be cruising. That's it. We got to change that, and I'm planning on doing that. My dad tried a little bit to persuade me not to go. He thought it was a little bit waste of money, waste of time, and there's other good things to do on Earth, to be honest. But I think he also realized there's no chance on Earth he would be able to persuade me otherwise. I'm going to space. That's not up for negotiation. October 31st, 2014 was the most tragic day ever for me. It was the day that we buried my dad. I get a phone call from one of the Danish TV stations, and they asked me, what do you think about the galactic rocket? I was like, what? And I immediately looked up online, and I saw my rocket smashed on the ground, and I could read that one of the astronauts died, and I was like, my God, you got to be kidding me. This is just awful. So at the same day as my dad's funeral, I also saw my dreams of space being crushed. But having said all that, no point in time did it ever change my determination. I did not regret, and I did not even think about not going to space. In fact, the opposite. It only reinforced my desire to go to space. Why? Because never give up on your dreams. Always live them out. There will be setbacks. Accidents do happen. We're here for a limited period of time. Enjoy life to the max. And that's what I'm doing through my adventures and living out my dreams. And my biggest dream is to go into space. In order to go into space, there's basically two things you need to train for. Number one is pressure on your body. We have to be able to take 6 Gs this way on the chest. So that's the equivalent of you lying on the floor and having 6 people standing on top of you. That's a lot of pressure. Therefore, it's a very good idea to train. The way we do that is through the centrifuge. The second thing you need to prepare for is obviously when you get into space and you are there, you've got to be able to be in a weightless environment. You have your liquids in the ears that are sort of spinning around and you're just not used to it. The way we train for that is going into an Illusion 76 massive cargo aeroplane, going up to an altitude of 16 kilometers, and then we nosedive down for 30-40 seconds at a time, accelerating on the way down into towards Earth, thereby creating plus G minus G, that's 0G, weightlessness, and we're now floating around, spinning around, and you're completely like a bird. It's fantastic. Takeoff is going to be wonderful, and then boom, it really kicks in. We will then wait for the signal from ground control. They'll say, are we ready to launch? Yes, we're ready to launch. So we're still flying here, flying. And then get, yes, go, release. 3, 2, 1, go. And then, whoa, that then drops down. Mothership then goes a little bit on the side, go away to get out of the way. And then it goes like this, straight into space. And then once you're in space, and then suddenly you go from all this sort of noise and power and everything, and then suddenly it switches off. It's silence, and you're floating around. You're looking at the beautiful Earth. You're weightless. So there's like nothing. It's the beautiful silence. Once we're effectively turning the rocket around and heading back into Earth, we're then going to hit the atmosphere, and we'll experience 3,000 degrees centigrade outside the cabin. It's going to get very hot. And arguably, that's kind of the most dangerous part of the whole trip. I'm not scared. I'm not indifferent and ignorant to the dangers that potentially are there. I'm aware. It's not a risk-free exercise, but few things in this world are, particularly if they're exciting. What's the point of living if you can't feel alive? You gotta get out there and try it, and probably sounds more dangerous than it actually is, to be honest.
And good luck to Pierre when he finally heads off into space. Now, this bar in the 1960s used to be called the Mousetrap, and it was a frequent haunt for astronauts who wanted to let off steam. But if they weren't here, nor in the Kennedy Space Center, they'd be found in the most unlikely of places, Iceland, which played a little known but important part in the preparations for the moon landing.
As Kat Moe has been finding out.
In the early 1960s, NASA searched the globe to find a training landscape that resembled the moon, and they finally found it here in Iceland. Close to the Arctic Circle, lava deserts and glaciers cover over 60% of its rugged landscapes. So NASA sent its budding Apollo astronauts here to learn about geology and practice collecting rock samples.
Well, the reason the astronauts were trained in Iceland was because most of them were pilots, and they were the best pilots from the military. They were focused on the sky, but NASA wanted them to look down at the ground and study the rock that was below their feet. This crater was formed 10,000 years ago, and it was one of the sites that the Apollo astronauts visited while they were training for their missions to the moon. And this is a classic site where they would have done the moon game, where they actually compete against one another and have to collect the best samples, and the geologists then look over what they bring back and tell them who did the best in this particular field.
Back in 1967, local sheep farmer Ingolfur Jonasson was 19 years old when one day visiting astronauts Neil Armstrong and Bill Anders asked to join him on a fishing trip.
Armstrong var mjög svona indæll maður og bauð að sér eins og við séum hér góðan þokka.
The Exploration Museum opened here in the town of Húsavík back in 2014 to pay tribute to the role Iceland played in the 1969 moon landings.
Well, I get a lot of groups to this museum. I had a group from the Central Bank of Iceland 2 years ago, and I told them that they are familiar with our currency and how it can go up and down pretty quick. This here, you can actually pass this box along. This is a coin An Icelandic coin that flew 10 times around the moon in 1968. It has never gone up as fast, and it went down pretty quickly when it came back.
Tourism in Iceland has been enjoying a boom in recent years, but many people coming here aren't aware of the Apollo connection when they're visiting or Instagramming its lunar-type landscape.
Jack Smith, who was the only scientist who actually walked on the moon, he told me that Armstrong picked up a lot of skill during his time in Iceland, and it contributed greatly to his collection of rocks that he brought back from the moon.
Ég heyrði þetta, hlusta á þetta bara í útvarpi og þetta var bein útsetning þegar var lýsingin á því þegar hann steig á tunglið. Það bara stund sem maður gleymir ekki. Það var mjög sérstakt.
Perhaps it's no surprise that the country once home to Viking explorers also helped to put man on the moon back in 1969.
And that is all we've got time for on this, the 50th anniversary of the historic moon landing. But join us next week if you can, when?
We're on New York's public transit system with the volunteer crime fighters, the Guardian Angels, as they celebrate their 40th anniversary.
We're going to end up taking the A train, riding it up to 190th Street.
We'll find out how they're still working to keep the subway safe and meet the new generation of recruits who say time's up for anyone who targets women travellers.
He grabbed my mother's purse and pulled her back down the stairs. But this was the turning point, like the drive to help people.
Well, that's next week. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow us on social media, where you can share your travel stories with the world. But for now, from me, Rajan, Datar, and the rest of the Travel Show team here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, it's goodbye.